All right, so again, this is the Olmstead of Disability, Civil Rights, and Long Road Home. Next slide, please. So we want to thank our sponsors as soon as that slide comes up. So we want to thank Zartec, which is Self-Advocacy Resource and Technical Assistance Center. They are the ones who are being our technical people today and providing the GoToMeeting platform for us to have this webinar. If you could go to the next slide, Juliana, please, ma'am. Also, co-sponsoring is People First of Georgia, in which we are so proud to have Renita Bundridge, who is the president of People First of Georgia, is going to be one of our speakers today. Our other sponsors are Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered, SABE for short, and the Georgia Advocacy Office, and the NDRN, the National Disability Rights Network. And we want to thank the Georgia Advocacy Office, GAO, for providing the cart for today. So, Juliana, if we could go to the next slide, please.
All right, I did send it, put it to the next slide. Do you have it now?
No, it has not changed from the first slide. Can you do something, please? So we're just having lots of technical difficulties.
I know, I might have to have you be the presenter and show your screen.
I think that may take a minute to make that happen.
Because I'm clicking on the PowerPoint.
And it's not working at all.
I can make you, so I can give you keyboard and mouse. Let me, no, it won't work. Shoot.
So let me introduce myself. I'm your host, Cherie Mitchell, and I am the National Chair for Long Road Home, which is an event that happens every year around the anniversary of Olmstead, which is June the 22nd. So happy Olmstead Day to you. I am a self-advocate, first and foremost. I have worked for 14 years at the Georgia P&A, Protection and Advocacy, which is called the Georgia Advocacy Office. I am a seasoned speaker and a nationally known advocate, and my favorite things are empowering people with disabilities, and particularly in helping people find their voice. So our first presenter, when we can get this PowerPoint to work, you may have to unshare and then reshare, Juliana, to get it to work, is going to be Elizabeth Pralo with the National Disability Rights Network. So, yay, we went to the next slide. Can we go forward two more, please? So those are our list of speakers for today. Go to the next one. So what is Olmstead? It starts with the story of the Olmstead case. It was a case brought to explain what the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, meant around where people should receive services. It begins with two women whose picture is there, Lois Curtis and Elaine Wilson, who had mental illness and developmental disabilities and were voluntarily admitted to the psych unit at the state-run Georgia Regional Hospital. Following their treatment, they were ready to leave, but could not leave because they couldn't get the services they needed, and thus brought around the Olmstead case, which led to the Supreme Court decision known as the Olmstead decision. If we could go to the next slide, please. So the Olmsted decision is a Supreme Court decision making it a law of the land. So it's a civil right. Olmsted is a civil right. Next slide, please. So what basically the Olmsted decision says is that people with disabilities should receive services in the most integrated setting, which means in the community. Most integrated settings, meaning in the community. That's, if you remember those two lines, you know what Olmsted is about. Next slide, please. So who does Olmsted apply to? It applies to every person with a disability and every kind of disability. Next slide. I apologize if I'm going too fast. We're trying to make up a little time here. So we got a poll question. If you would, if you could check yes or no, does your state have an Olmsted plan? An Olmsted plan was one of the first things that the judge said needed to be done for states to be Olmsted compliant. So check yes or no. All right, Juliana, show us the results of the poll. Juliana? Okay, so we seem to be stuck in the poll. Oh, there we go. It moved, but then it went to, we need to go back to the PowerPoint. It didn't show us the results, but it's okay. So let's go on to the next slide.
I can let you know that 97 people said yes and 3% said no.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Juliana.
And there you go, see?
Yeah, 97% said yes, only 3% said no. So 97% of you, your state has an Olmsted plan. That's awesome. All right. So we could go to the next slide. So Elizabeth Prelo is now going to speak to us about Olmsted being a civil right, why it's important, and what needs to be in an Olmsted plan. So again, Elizabeth Prelo is the Senior Disability Legal Specialist at National Disability Rights Network, NDRN. Go ahead, Elizabeth, take it out.
Yeah, for those of you who are quick readers who might have read that I was the attorney on the case, I was not. That was Sue Jameson from Atlanta Legal Aid. So I didn't want anybody to misunderstand that. Hopefully y'all have met Sue Jameson. She's super cool, and she's from Atlanta. So, but anyway, everything else was right, that I'm with the National Disability Rights Network. And if you want to know what NDRN is, it's the membership association for groups like Georgia Advocacy Office. There's one in every state. They're federally funded, and we will represent people with disabilities who have been discriminated. Of course, we get a lot more P&As, like the Georgia Advocacy Office, get a lot more calls than they have time to and resources to do. So they set priority areas, and one of the priority areas in every single protection and advocacy agency is enforcement of Olmstead. So I think there was one slide before this. I mean, there was an early slide that I said don't do. I think that there was supposed to be a slide that says, why is Olmstead cool?
Go next.
Okay, fine. Well, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's it. Haha. Okay, good. So, I was asked to tell you why Olmsted is important, and I bet you all have heard about Olmsted and can speak eloquently on this. But why is it important? It makes clear that people with disabilities are an important part of American life and American community, and just as equally as important as anyone else. So we have a right to live and participate in all aspects of society. And if you read the actual words of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the preamble does say that. Give people with disabilities access to all areas of American life. What else does it say? It says that we must have integration in all aspects of our lives. That includes where we live, where we work, and where we spend our days. And I think that Julie Kegley later is going to be talking about how Olmstead applies to employment and to our work settings. It also says we must have quality community-based services. It says we must have choices other than segregated settings and programs. So what do we mean by segregated settings? We'll go into that a little bit later. But when I think about segregated settings, I think about settings where it's predominantly for people with disabilities. Sometimes they might have people without disabilities come and be caretakers, or in the case of employment, run the sheltered workshop, but that's not integrated. That is a segregated setting. So we must have choices beyond those disability-only settings. And Olmstead is important because it says self-advocates must be involved in telling state workers and politicians what community services are needed. I'm sure you've all heard of nothing about us without us, but if we don't speak up and say what services we need, then it allows the services to be very limited, and where we get back in a situation like Lois Curtis and Elaine Wilson were, the two plaintiffs in Olmstead, where they needed certain services, they weren't available in the community, and they could just say, oh, keep waiting. So we need to be telling advocates and politicians what community services will allow us to live a quality life in the community. So next slide, please. Okay, so Olmstead does two things. It not only helps people get out of institutions, it keeps people from going in. And that is because Olmstead applies to people living in the community, but not getting good support. And so let's say a very common example. Somebody has a disability, their parent is their main caregiver, their parent is now in their 90s, has bad back problems, can't help with any lifting, has problems with their own activities of daily living, and so they are at risk. At risk could be other things, like they were supposed to get 45 hours of community services a week, but all of a sudden their providers start calling in and saying, I'm sorry, I know you're eligible for 45 hours a week, but we just can't find enough people. So you're only getting 30, and that puts that person at risk of institutionalization. So this is really important. A lot of people read the Olmstead decision and think that because Lois Curtis and Elaine Wilson were in facilities, that's where you had to be for Olmstead to apply. And it is not the case. Olmstead applies to people in facilities who want to get out, and for people at risk of institutionalization who want to make sure they stay in the community. So what are some other places it applies to? Nursing facilities, state hospitals, developmental centers. Those are, like in Virginia, they're called state schools. Some other places they're called training centers, but they're often where people with developmental and intellectual disabilities live. Foster care. A lot of people in foster care are often placed into inappropriate settings, but there are foster care places, usually called therapeutic foster care, that are in family homes, and Olmstead would apply to those individuals with disabilities and give them the right to be in the most integrated setting appropriate. It applies to segregated employment. So what do we mean by that? We mean sheltered workshops, or maybe your employment says it's integrated, but really the only people that you see are the people that work there. That would be an example of segregated employment. And jails and prisons. A lot of our work as attorneys has been in the area of jails and prisons. So you ask, how could that be? It could be that people in jails and prisons, they go in and instantly they have their or their mental health prescriptions taken away. Well, that would be a violation of the ADA in general. Or the prison or jail is inaccessible, so they can't get to the cafeteria, so they're forced to eat all their meals in their room. That would be an ADA violation. An Olmstead violation would be, for example, that because of a manifestation of someone's disability, they may get into trouble more often, and as a result, the people will say, well, you're not eligible for parole because you're always getting into trouble. So the person ends up staying in the jail or prison for longer than they need to. That would be an Olmstead violation if you could show that the reason that they were always getting into trouble was because they weren't getting appropriate mental health services, they weren't getting appropriate prescription medication. Of course, they're going to, maybe as a manifestation of their disability, get into more trouble. So, and it applies to segregated schools and segregated classrooms. And Georgia and GAO was one of the pioneers in litigating, suing to make sure that people understood that Olmstead would apply to segregated schools and segregated classrooms. So I can talk a little bit about that later, or maybe Julie will talk about that, but it's important to know that it does apply to segregated classrooms and schools as well. Next slide, please. Okay. Sorry, I'm already running over probably. Okay. So what are the key roles for self-advocates? Again, I think we might have missed a couple of slides, but okay. There is a battle going on to save Olmstead. And the battle is basically that there are some very organized groups. We used to call them parent groups, but now they're more often sibling groups, where they have sometimes usually an older person with a disability, maybe in their 40s and 50s, who was placed in an institution, you know, at 0, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, and the parents were told there are no community services for you. If you try to have your child live in the community, you're going to end up getting a divorce because it's going to be so hard on your family. It's going to be unfair to the individuals' other children. They're going to be neglected. And boy, oh boy, you better put your child in this institution. And some of these groups now, you know, now it's the parents have died and it's the siblings, and they say, oh my gosh, my individual has lived in the institution their entire lives, and you're telling me they can live in the community? No way. And some of these groups have gotten very, very organized, hired high-priced attorneys, and gotten the ear of the federal government and told them, not everybody can live in the community. Here are some of the things they say. You know, the institutions are so much safer. If you let my family member with a disability out, they're gonna die instantly. They're gonna have no friends, and the institution is their home. And you all might have heard of this. I'm saying for sure you've heard of this. And they'll say, oh, my family member is so disabled that everybody else that lives in the community, they're so different from my family. My family member needs to stay in the community. So what is the key role for self-advocates? To counter this, to say no. You know, studies show that for every person in an institution, there is an identical person with an identical level of disability living in the community safely and happily. And, you know, and people aren't going up to the federal government and saying these family members are wrong. People of all different disabilities can live in the community as long as they have the right services. And nobody's going to go up to them. So they're going to have these very well financed family member groups with big powered attorneys telling them, you know, don't let my family member out, keep those institutions open. The only people left to say, are you guys self-advocates and family members and advocate and attorneys like the protection and advocacy agencies like GAO, but it's really the self-advocates that get heard. It's very easy for the federal government to blow off an attorney and say, "Oh, they're just an attorney," you know. But it's much harder if they hear your actual story and hear perhaps that you were living in an institution and you wanted out and you felt that you were able to live in the community. Something that's very important to know about Lois Curtis and Elaine Wilson was they were older. They weren't in their 20s and 30s. They were in their 40s, maybe 50s. It doesn't matter if they're older. They want to live in the community. Come on. And so it's the role for self-advocate is to say, first, institutions are not safer than the community, that there is a heck of a lot of history of people being abused and neglected in institutions to this day. And if you've been listening about the coronavirus, think about all the people that are in nursing facilities. They are dying at much higher rates than people who are in the community. It's just an example. Institutions, you're out of sight and you're out of mind, but community, you're right there. People know you. People see you on a regular basis, and so you tell them institutions are not safer than the community, and you also tell them community living is possible no matter what disability you have, as long as the appropriate services are in place, and that Olmstead creates a right to live, work, and play in the most integrated settings. So when I say play, yes, we're talking about state parks and bowling alleys and I don't know why I said bowling alleys, but I thought it was so funny when Georgia opened up everything so quick, including bowling alleys. So I figured maybe bowling alleys are a big thing in Georgia. But you also want to, what's going to the federal government these days, and they are believing it. They are using this word choice and telling the federal government, choice means we have a choice of living in the institutions or the community. And that is flat out wrong. That is a lie, lie, lie. What you want to tell them is Olmstead does not create a right to choose to live in a segregated institution. You've had that right always. The whole point of Olmstead was to say you have the choice to not have to live in a segregated setting. Segregation is a violation of the ADA. The ADA doesn't say, now you have a right to be segregated. It says segregation is a violation of the ADA. Your right is to be free of segregation and institutionalization. That is the right of Olmstead. There is no right to choose. So Sherry is showing me that my time is probably up. Let me just see the last slide and see if there's anything vital that I had to tell you. Well, it's going to go all about.
That was just saying that I love what you're saying.
My time is up. Now, I was going to go into all this legal stuff, and I'll just say real quickly. Oh, I did want to talk about an Olmstead plan, okay? So Olmstead, there actually is a limitation on Olmstead, and I could, it basically says that the ADA requires states to make reasonable changes in order to ensure that all programs include people with disabilities. So you hear that word reasonable. Now that's why you have attorneys like Julie and I to say, we think reasonable is do damn well everything, because this is a civil right we're talking about. But then you're gonna have the states say reasonable, oh, you can't ask me to spend all that much money. That is not reasonable because I'm gonna go out of business and so that's one of the limitations on the ADA. They have to make modifications to include people, but they're not required to make, and the words I use is fundamental alterations. But for you as advocates, argue that every damn thing you need is reasonable, because you're talking about your freedom. You're talking about a fundamental civil right. Okay, so some states try to argue that is, oh, just go back, back one slide. I promise I'll be very quick. If you can go back one slide, yes. Okay, so some states will try to argue that it's too expensive to create community services or to move people quicker. And I'm sure you're all in Georgia and you've heard Georgia make this argument. And so what did the Supreme Court say to that? It's probably true. You can't overnight have appropriate services for people with disabilities and say, hey, if you want out, go out, because they'd just be in settings that where they wouldn't get the services they need. And guess what? They just revolve right back into the developmental center. So the Supreme Court said, okay, we know that you got to take the time to set up good services. We don't want to dump people out in the community with crappy services. So what we're going to do is say that you can make a plan, but the plan must move at a reasonable pace. That's another word that lawyers go crazy over. What is a reasonable pace? But again, you want to say, if you don't see Georgia spending money on community services, if you see them trying to reopen an institution or rebuild an institution, put in a new swimming pool, you stand up and say, no way. You should be spending money on the community because it's our right to have services in the most integrated setting. So a quick word on the plan, because I was asked to, okay, now you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I want to tell you about these plans. Okay, yeah, y'all said your state had a plan. I can guarantee you, not a single state that developed a plan is actually looking at that plan or following it in any way. They developed a plan because because they were told to by the federal government, and they said it will give you a defense to an immediate lawsuit. So they all wanted a defense to an immediate lawsuit. They called people together. They probably used self-advocates, had a wonderful advisory committee. You put together this terrific plan, and then your advisory committee was disbanded. That plan was put on a shelf. Every state felt great because they were free of being sued, and they thought that people would be distracted and move on to the next thing. But self-advocates and protection and advocacy agencies said, don't you forget Olmstead, don't you forget this plan. And states continued to ignore the plan, and so that's when we had to sue. So it's actually lawsuits that have dictated what must be in the plan, okay? So these things I'm going to tell you about are from lawsuits. They might not be lawsuits in your state, but you have a right to ask for these services because some jurisdiction has said in some state, this is what would be an effective plan. Okay, so it said more housing that is close to transportation. Transportation has to be a key part of plans. You got to be able to get to your appointments. More competitive employment, and Julie's going to go more into that. But competitive employment means that you're making a wage just like everybody else who's doing the same work that you're doing. Competitive employment usually means employment in integrated settings where you work with people without disabilities. More Medicaid funded community services. Medicaid is vital here because so many people with disabilities, because of societal stigma and societal prejudice and years of prejudice, are not making a living wage and are living with Medicaid. So it is Medicaid that we need to, instead of saying, okay, you have the right to live in this institution, we need Medicaid to stand up and say, okay, we're going to fund those waiting lists and we're going to make sure they move at a reasonable pace, like it said in Olmstead. So more Medicaid services, more efforts to train and get direct care providers, because one of the biggest reasons now, it used to be there's no accessible housing. Now the biggest reason used to keep people in institutions is there are no community-based providers. And I think that that was huge during this pandemic because direct care providers were getting sick and were worried about not being able to social distance. But actually, I've talked to several disability advocates in the past month who say that it might actually be easier to find direct care providers after the coronavirus because so many people have lost their jobs. It's really sad, but I hope that it has a silver lining like that, because that is one of the main reasons why people have trouble getting appropriate services. But for advocates' part, you got to be up there and you got to be saying, you know, what can you do to get direct care providers? Can you waive their college fees? Can you make it a program at your local community college? Can you give them a break on taxes? Can you increase provider wages? There are things the state can do to increase direct care providers. And so they need to hear from you. More peer supports and ACT programs, and that people need to move out quicker with supports in place. Again, that means that we don't want people dumping people out of institutions. We want supports in place, the kind of thing, for example, like that you get to, they'll say, oh, we have one place for you. One place for you. So if you want to get out, you'll go to this one place. And let's say that you go to this one place and you find out that it's not accessible. But if you wanted to live there, somebody would have to carry you in and out on your wheelchair, or that there are bed bugs or something disgusting. Well, for years now, we have seen people say, no, I'm not going to take that placement. So they're put right back in the institution and nobody talks to them again for another 2 to 3 years. And they'll say, oh, we asked them. They said no to community placement. I mean, you have a right to live in the most integrated setting. You can turn down a placement and you have a right to keep looking and find a place before you move that meets your needs. Okay, so I gotta stop now, but look forward to your questions.
Did you want to go over this one, Elizabeth? I think there's still 2 more slides. You are muted. We can't hear you.
Well, we're completely out of time, and I really want Julie and Renata to go, so I think I said all I need to say.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So go to the next slide, and another one. Okay. All right. So our next presenter is going to be Julie Kegley. She's the senior staff attorney and program director with the Georgia Advocacy Office, which is the federally funded private nonprofit protection and advocacy P&A system for Georgia. Julie has been doing this for 20 years, and she has represented hundreds of people with disabilities on a variety of issues. So, Julie, if you would, we're going to let you take it and go forward.
Thank you, Sheree. If we can go to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So I want to say happy 21st anniversary of the Olmstead decision. And I am so honored to be able to co-present with this panel of fabulous staff advocates. I have known Elizabeth for close to 20 years, and I've known Sheree and Renata for more than 10 years. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for all of them. I'm just really, really honored to be able to present here today. And we're going to be talking about how Olmstead and the integration mandate definitely applies to competitive integrated employment. And God, we have a long way to go. I mean, 21 years from this decision, and we still have a long way to go because people with disability are still not in competitive integrated employment. So the next slide talks about what the definition of competitive integrated employment is. So competitive means that you are making minimum wage or greater. And integrated means that people with disability are working at a job alongside people without disability. And if we can go to the next slide, why do some people make less than minimum wage? That is because Congress allowed for that. Back in the 30s and 40s, when Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, they inserted a provision in there that's called Section 14C. And it allowed for some employers to apply for and get this 14C certificate and pay people with disabilities less than minimum wage. And that practice is still going on today. Today, in all of the country, there are 420,000 people with disabilities making less than minimum wage. And in Georgia, we have 1,500 people with disability making less than minimum wage. We still have 33 employers that have that 14C certificate. So it is legal, believe it or not, legal to pay people with disabilities sub minimum wage. So if we can go to the next slide. We want to eliminate sub-minimum wage, absolutely eliminate it. And what can we as staff advocates do? We need to be contacting our elected representatives. There are 2 pending pieces of legislation that we can be contacting our representatives about. And one of them is the Transformation to Competitive Employment Act. What that act would do, if it's passed, it would stop giving new 14C certificates to employers. And it would phase out the existing 14C certificates. It would also allow for $300 million in funding to give the 14C employers money so that they can have capacity building to know how to redirect those services so that people with disabilities are able to work with people without disability. The other piece of legislation is the Raise the Wage Act. So right now, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. What this act would do is it said by the year 2025, the federal minimum wage would be raised to $15 an hour. So contact your congressman and advocate for these 2 acts to be passed. The next slide, please. So we talked about the 14C certificate holders. They have a fancy name. And the fancy name is Community Rehabilitation Program. But in reality, they're nothing more than a sheltered workshop. And a sheltered workshop, remember, there's 33 of them in the state. They are like big warehouses, industrial type buildings. And you have people with disabilities mostly sitting at a table. And it's only people with disabilities. Now, the staff might not have a disability, but the only people in this big old building are going to be people with disabilities. And they are doing jobs that none of us would do. So one workshop that I went to, everybody was sitting at the table and everybody was cleaning coat hangers. So I went to one of the staff and I said, why are they cleaning coat hangers? And she was so proud of herself. She said, oh, we have a contract with the local dry cleaning company and they pay us to clean the coat hangers in between use. And I thought, oh, what an awful job. And then I went to another workshop where people with disabilities are all sitting in a row and they are tearing pages out of the textbook so that the pages can be recycled. And again, not something that you and I would do, but keep in mind, these workshops pay people based upon their level of productivity. So if that's not a job that you want to be doing, and you don't care anything about cleaning coat hangers, you're not going to do anything. So let's say you manage to clean 5 coat hangers in an hour. You are only going to be paid pennies because they're paying you based upon your productivity level. So we absolutely have got to advocate that these Section 14C certificate holders be eliminated. For the next slide, please. So, employment first. You might have heard this term a lot, but employment first is it's a state basically saying that they agree that employment is the first and preferred option for people with disabilities. 45 states around the country have some kind of employment first thing. It could be an executive order, legislation, a council. Georgia has not made it so far as to say we are an employment first state. What we've done is created an employment first council. And it's a 14-member council that meets 3-4 times a year, and they're supposed to send a report to the governor about what their recommendations would be. Now, this council meets sporadically. They have not done much. And what ideally we hope that they recommend would be the phase out of Section 14C certificate holders, that they raise the minimum wage, that they give money for provider capacity, all of these things, but we don't know yet what's going to happen. So if you are in an employment first state, you want to know what's going on, what's really going on at that level. So I think we still have a long way to go. The takeaway for this is we have a long way to go, but that Olmsted absolutely allowed for people with disabilities to be employed in the most integrated setting. And so with that, I am going to wrap up. I want to give everybody else time to talk, but I also want to apologize in advance because I've got another meeting that I've got to hop over to right now. So if anybody wants to contact me directly, Cherie will have my contact information and she can give that out. Plus, Cherie can probably answer any question that I can answer. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you, Julie. That was excellent. Great information. And self-advocacy is key to making a difference. So next slide, please, Juliana. So now we have a poll question for everybody, and it says, do you think self-advocacy had anything to do with Olmstead and getting the Olmstead decision? So if you would check yes or no, Juliana, if you could bring the poll up. There it is. We're getting better with our technology. Yay. So if you could click yes or no, do you think that self-advocacy had anything to do with getting the Olmstead decision? Yes or no? And then Juliana, if you could bring up the results for us. It says 100% said yes. Yay, I agree. All right, great. You guys are on it. You know, self-advocacy makes the difference. Next slide, please. So next we're gonna show you a recording. Bernard Baker is the current president of SABE, Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered. And Bernard is also a disability civil rights pioneer. He was one of those people that climbed up the steps in DC to advocate for the ADA being passed. And he's a founding member and former president of People First of Georgia. Bernard is currently on the board of the directors for the Georgia Advocacy Office. He owns a small business of his own, and he's a father to 3 children. And he truly shows the world that people with disabilities can lead meaningful lives. So Juliana, if you could show us the recording that we made of Bernard so that he could speak to us today. We have no sound. Juliana, we have no sound. Well, we're going to have to work on our technology. Okay, so we still have no sound. So let's just go forward. What Bernard was going to talk to you about, and he was going to talk about the fact that self-advocacy is so important. It did make a humongous difference in getting the Olmsted decision. If you could go on to the next slide, Juliana. We have a little film clip that we're going to show you. It is from a larger, that get it? Did that get it started? So let's go to the next to show the film clip from Atlanta Legal Aid, where one of the attorneys who did do the Olmsted case talks about the difference that self-advocacy made in getting the Olmsted decision. You could bring that up. Guys, I apologize for all the technical difficulties we've had today. Sometimes it just doesn't cooperate. But Bernard would tell you that self-advocacy is important. You know, he, like I said, he crawled out of his chair and up the steps of the United States Capitol to fight for getting the Olmsted decision passed. He chained himself to Greyhound buses to advocate for the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and he just he totally believes, and I agree, that self-advocacy is the key, and that's what makes the difference. So the video that we're going to watch here, if we can get it going.
And Sherry, let me just say, self-advocacy is also the key to stopping these threats to Olmsted, you know, and making the people that are saying that Olmsted is not for everyone and Olmsted is about choice of an institution. It's self-advocates that the federal government will listen to when you guys say, community integration works for everyone.
No, you are so right, Elizabeth, and please feel free to jump in and share your thoughts. This particular video was made by the Atlanta Legal Aid, who actually did the original Olmsted case that went to the Supreme Court, and they tell a story about what happened, because at one point there were 22 states who sided with Georgia because Olmsted decision happened in Georgia, and they were saying that they agreed with Georgia that these people needed to be provided services in these state hospitals and in these institutions. And self-advocates went to work and made the difference. Juliana, are you ready to show this? I think we had a particular spot that we wanted to start with in the video, because we don't have time to watch the whole video. I wish we did. But you guys, the link is in the PowerPoints. I'm happy to share the PowerPoints with anyone who wants it, and you can watch the whole video. But we're going to just watch a little portion that talks about how self-advocacy made the difference in getting the Olmsted decision passed.
What was the number again?
I gave it to you yesterday. I think it was 17. Whoa. It would be starting at 17, I believe. All right, just start it right there. We have a few minutes. We can watch a larger portion if we need to. So we're just totally not having any luck with technology today. So, but what they said in this video was that 22 states had sided in favor of Georgia, and then self-advocates went to work. The Atlanta Legal Aid put the word out to self-advocates and disability organizations that what was happening. And self-advocates went to work. They started talking to their state legislators, talking to the people in charge, and before it was over, they were down to 5 states that were agreeing with Georgia. And actually, states who originally said they agreed with Georgia turned around and said, no, we can do this in the community. And thus, self-advocacy made a big difference in getting the Olmstead decision passed. And not only did that happen, but a lot of self-advocates turned out for the actual hearings, right? So those judges weren't just looking at lawyers. It's real easy to deny people their rights when you're not looking at them. But they had courtrooms full of people with disabilities there.
Sherry, were you there?
I wasn't there. That's a little bit before my time.
I was there, and I'm 51 already, so I was there, and I have to say that we stayed out overnight. There was a whole group of adapters, and we stayed out overnight. It was very, very cold. I mean, even though it was June 22nd, I don't know, it was a cold night. And every time people had to go to the bathroom, they had to go to Union Station from the Supreme Court, which was not a short little trek. And people stayed up and had solidarity. And the coolest thing was, sure, you can't influence the Supreme Court. You're not, but after the Supreme Court arguments, there were a lot of press outside, and they saw all the people in wheelchairs and interviewed them, and that was fantastic, because you had people talking about how they wanted out and how the community meant so much to them, and it really had an impact. Another thing that I think was impactful was that the Supreme Court was not set up for people with wheelchairs. And so, just like so often happens in protests, I'm sure the protests in Georgia too, it catches all the security guards off, oh my goodness, what are we gonna do? And they had to, move seats and all that stuff makes a difference. It makes people realize, gosh, we need to set up so people in wheelchairs can be in the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, a lot of them ended off in the wings where there were movable chairs and then an overflow room. But still, we made the point, set up the world for us, and that we could talk to the media and tell our stories. But I was real impressed with the folks that stayed overnight, because it was cold.
Yeah, no, I agree. But it's really, and like I said, those reporters talking to people and showing that on the TV, that was putting pressure on those judges. And then having the people in the room, it is really hard to deny somebody their rights when you're having to look them in the eye and do it. So, people with disabilities played a major role in getting the Olmstead decision passed. And there's no doubt about that. Self-advocacy is always important. It takes us telling our stories. It takes us showing up. You know, there's an old saying that says the world is run by those who show up. And so we need to show up and do that. So self-advocacy is the key. If we can go to the next slide, Juliana. So past and future of Olmstead, advocates have made a big difference in the past, and self-advocates, we are talking with our legislators and our policymakers about bringing our states into compliance. And that is going to be really important to make this happen, because unfortunately, we are 21 years into this, and there are states who have an Olmstead plan, but they're not implemented. Georgia is one of those states. There are other states that have it implemented, but it's missing key components. Because remember, Olmstead is for every person with a disability, every type of disability. Juliana, if you could go to the next PowerPoint for us, please. So, you know, not every state is in compliance. Many people with disabilities still live in institutions instead of integrated settings. And the U.S. Department of Justice is working to make a difference, but it takes self-advocates joining together to make the dream of home and services in the community real. Next slide. So ever since 2004 here in Georgia, because Olmstead happened here, we felt like the self-advocates in this state felt like they had an obligation to be proactive. And so we started something called Long Road Home in 2004. I took over as chair in 2009. And we have gone from being just in Georgia to being in 8 other states total. So that's 7 plus Georgia. And we want to see it continue to go. So it's really important that people understand the necessariness of the importance of Olmstead. It's important that that self-advocates go to work and do your own Long Road Home event to raise awareness that people with disabilities have the right to receive services in the most integrated setting, meaning in the community. Today, we want to do more. We want to work toward Olmstead compliance all across the United States and the territories of the United States. Next slide, please. So here, as you can see, a little display that we put together from the years of 2004 through to last year of different things that we've done to celebrate Olmstead. Next slide, please. So we're going to try to show 2 more videos. I'm hoping it works this time. If not, I will explain what was in the videos. Juliana, if you can work on bringing the first one up. So this is an excerpt from several videos that we made for Long Road Home. And the very first one was actually inducted into the Civil Rights Hall of Fame in Montgomery, Alabama. So I think that's very cool. And my late husband starred in those videos. And so when he died, we took scenes from each of those videos and made a little 8-minute video to honor Sam. And it will give you a taste and a flavor of what we've done in the past in Long Road Home, if we can get it to work. Because we've done marches, we've done rallies, we've done lunch and learns, we've done
you definitely were on the Olmstead Advisory Council. You when the plan was developed, you guys were very active in saying what the plan should include, even though they blew it off later.
Yeah, Yeah, we did. We did that. We've met with legislators. We had a legislation day at the Capitol and different things. So a Long Road Home event can be many things. So looks like we're not going to have any luck with this video. But in the video, you get to see, you know, a march. See us there marching. I believe that's at Milledgeville, Georgia, in the very first year, and we had over 100 people to march. That scene, that particular scene there, is from Athens, Georgia. We marched there and then had a rally on Main Street. Like I said, we've had lunch and learn. We've had Olmstead celebration parties. A lot of things. I can hear a little sound, but not much. The sound is just not coming through. In the video, Sam talks about his experience of being in an institution. He talks about how a nursing facility is a nursing home is not a home. He said that they called them residents, but he felt like a prisoner in the nursing home. So that video, the link is in the PowerPoints. If you'd like the PowerPoints, you can then watch the video yourself. Juliana, can we go to the next video? You know what? I'm just going to skip the next video. Can we go to the next slide and give up on the videos? So, like I said, Long Road Home can be a project, an event, or an action that encourages your state to either improve or become Olmstead compliant. The other video that we were going to show is two students from UGA, the University of Georgia, talking about their experience of participating in a Long Road Home. And they talked about how it was such an eye-opening experience for them because they didn't have disabilities, but to see people with disabilities out marching and participating with them, they started to realize that people with disabilities can live in the community. So if you can go to the next slide. Again, you know, a Long Road Home event can be a project, an event, it can be a party, it can be whatever you want it to be. But we hope that you'll consider doing a Long Road Home in your state next year. There are 3 things that are in a Long Road Home event. First is an Olmstead story. An Olmstead freedom story, an Olmstead freedom story. And that's a story told by someone who's actually gotten out of an institution or a nursing facility or some sort of segregated setting. And then the next thing that we have are what we called I Am Olmstead. And these are stories where people are living in the community successfully and have never been in an institution, and it's because of Olmstead. And then we always include voter registration and voter education because it's important. This is how we make the changes. Ultimately, it's about that voting for the right candidates who support Olmstead. Next slide, please.
Hey, Sherry, may I ask a question about that?
Sure.
The freedom stories, I was thinking that, you know, if you don't have somebody who wants to tell a freedom story, or you want to increase the number of freedom stories than you have in the group that's forming, I think it's also impactful to talk about if Medicaid has let you down, for example, and how it puts you at risk of institutionalization, because that's a huge part of Olmstead as well. And it can be just as sympathetic. For example, you know, if your provider is supposed to come and help you get out of bed and they don't show up, well, we all know the implications of that, and that can be very powerful. And how, you know, if you rely on family members and neighbors over and over and it just starts falling apart, that can be very powerful, especially if you end with the message, Medicaid is my lifeline. Medicaid needs to be funded. So just that, I'm the Medicaid person, so I had to put that plug in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You are so right. Renita, I just want to say to you, could you round up Al, because the videos aren't working, and so we're gonna just let you talk for a few minutes, okay?
So I also have you talked about the future of Olmstead, and I also have a slide on the future of Olmstead. So if after Renita there's time, I can do that one.
Absolutely, that'd be great. So again, you know, these freedom stories are told by people who have moved out of nursing facilities and institutions, are now living successfully and happily in the community. Next slide. So we were going to show a recording of Jerry back home, but unfortunately the recordings are not working. So let me just tell you about Jerry. Jerry had a stroke and was in a nursing facility for 9 years. And with the help of the Georgia Protection and Advocacy, the P&A, the Georgia Advocacy Office, and a program called Money Follows the Person. Now, if you're wondering, what is Money Follows the Person? Basically, what that means is that the money that was being spent for the person to be in the facility is going to follow the person into the community. And it helps to get them set up in the community. Because as we all know, when you enter a nursing facility, they take all your money, but a little bit, and you get to just keep a little bit. And it's really hard to pay a deposit for an apartment with just a little bit of money. I don't know about you guys, but I spend like $50 or $60 a month alone on hair care products. So, you know, that would eat that money up totally. So he was able to move back into the community, and he has been out now for about 2 years. I was very honored and lucky to get to help Jerry move back into the community. And he's doing great. He's loving it. You know, he gets to go out. He tickled me talking about going out to eat and going to Walmart and stuff. I wish that we could have gotten the video to work, but he is really enjoying living in the community. So, Renita, if you can unmute your phone, and if we could go to the next slide, please. So we know that we're not going to be able to see the video. So the next thing that are included, as we've said before, those I Am Olmstead stories. And these stories are how people with disabilities are living successfully in the community. So if we could go to the next slide. So our next presenter is going to share her I Am Olmstead story. Her name is Renita Bundridge. She was born with cerebral palsy, and she says that it affects her whole body, but not her brain. And she has not let the cerebral palsy keep her from getting involved in the community. She's a self-advocate. She's the current president of People First of Georgia. And she, one of her big things is she's advocating to change the marriage penalty that exists for people with disabilities who are on SSI. So, Renita, take it away. If you could talk to us for about 5 minutes about how you're living successfully in the community, and maybe talk just a few minutes about your advocacy work.
Okay.
name is Al. I will be translating for Anita, for everyone to understand her. You said you had a Medicaid waiver? You've been on your waiver for about 25 years now? Okay. It helps her to live independently. And to do whatever she wants to do in her life. Without the waiver, she said her mother would be having to take care of her without the waiver. She didn't have it. And her family. She said the waiver was very important to her. You said you had to advocate for your waiver? To keep your waiver. Yeah, because it good hours. Yeah, because they are, they cut some of her hours. But she have to, stay on top of it. Let them know how important it is to her and how it allows her to have a better life. Yeah, she said that if she didn't have her waiver, she don't know where she would be right now. Oh. Yeah. Oh, and she's telling, she's stating now why she advocates about the marriage penalty. Because she would like to be able to get married one day. Yes, and she was saying it's every woman's dream to be able to marry the person they love without having any issues. You want to speak about the marriage penalty? She has a website. Yes, the website is called obstaclesoflove.com. And she has a Facebook page also called Marriage Penalty.
Nice. Thank you, Anita. You know, I totally agree with you. It's not fair that people on SSI can't get married for fear of losing their services or their
Yes.
That's a real shame because you and Al have been together for how many years now?
We lost count. How many has it been? It's up there. It's like in the 30s now. The 30s. It's like 30. I want to say 32. You know, all the way from what was it, 88? You know, when we first met in elementary school.
Well, I do think that it's great that you guys are living together, and I hope that one day we are able to change the marriage penalty so that you can get married. I'm always blown away by your advocacy, Renita. It's so important for people to hear your story. And this is exactly what I mean by an I Am Olmstead story. It's the story of people with disabilities who are having good lives because you and Al do have a good life, and you are advocating and making a difference. And because of Olmstead, you're able to do that.
Yes.
You're not locked away. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So if we can go to the next slide, please. And the next one. If we could go to the next slide. We're not even going to try any more of those recordings. They're just not working. So the last thing of a Long Road Home event, and then we're going to try to go backwards and find your PowerPoints, Elizabeth, so that you can do those last two slides. Yes, ma'am. Renita.
Does anyone have any questions? What'd you say?
Do we have any questions in the panel in the chat box yet?
She was wondering if anyone can email her if they have any.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. They should be able to find it on the Obstacle for Love website, right?
Yeah.
All right, great.
What's the website address again?
Obstaclesoflove.com.
Say that one more time.
Obstaclesoflove.com. Run it all together. Let's just talk about the last thing that we do in Long Road Home events, and that is voter registration. Here in Georgia, we use the mail-in voter forms for people to register. The mail-in registration forms, the motor voter forms. And we do voter education at Long Road Home events. We even have a Long Road Home flyer on voting. And if anybody is interested in that, you can contact me. My contact info is at the end of the PowerPoint. And I'll be glad to send you that. And I'll also be glad to send you any contact information for any of the presenters as well. Next slide, please. Juliana, next slide. So, you know, voting is important. It's something that every self-advocate should do. You know, I told a group of self-advocates recently that, you know, we fought so hard for self-determination, and that if you don't vote, you're literally giving that self-determination away, because it is important that we vote. You know, Justin Dart used to say, vote as if your life depends on it. And that's because it does. These people that we're electing, they make the decisions about where money is spent, what programs are financed, and what programs exist. And so it's really important that as people with disabilities, and particularly self-advocates, that we vote. Next slide, please. Don't give away your self-determination. Next slide, Juliana. So the key goals of Long Road Home is to raise awareness, Olmstead compliance, everyone can live in the community, and Long Road Home is a celebration of disability civil rights. Next slide. So, you know, we want to know that we would love for next year for you guys to organize Long Road Home events in your community, and that we all get together and make a difference in the lives of people with disabilities. Now, Juliana, at this point, I'm going to ask you if you can go back to the last two slides of Elizabeth and let her talk about those two slides.
Great. In case, unless there is questions in the chat, I want to make sure we can get to those.
We have plenty of time. It's only 4:36.
Okay.
But we've got time.
That's what I mentioned my last two slides.
Yes, that's it. Right there.
Okay. So, you know how I mentioned the parts of the Olmsted plan? Just go back one, the one where it says Olmsted plan must be, okay, so here again are some of the things. Whoops, you did great before. Now go forward one. Okay. Okay, so again, I had mentioned some of the things that need to be in an Olmsted plan, and that still applies. And on the next slide, I basically say, but the plans need to be funded. And again, it's been 21 years since the Olmsted decision. Politicians have a bad habit of moving on, and they will, you know, move on as quick as a jackrabbit if they don't hear anybody saying, hey, Olmsted still needs to be enforced. And again, the best voices for that are people who are living in the community who can tell their stories, like Renita, and people who have moved, who are in facilities who want out, of every age and disability. So I think when in the next slide where it says Olmsted must be funded, I did provide two actual cases so that when you're up there, you don't have to know these cases, but you can know that there was the actual case law in different states that talk about how the state may not rely on the excuse of insufficient funding to avoid following through on important commitments it's made in its Olmsted plan. You can see this was just from 2015. And why is that? Because remember what I said before about the Olmsted plan, how the Supreme Court said you can use that because we know that you can't immediately have everybody living in the community, that you have to be able to build up services so that there's actually services when you move out. But it has to move at a reasonable pace. And so what happened? States did these plans and they put them aside and thought, well, hey, I'm protected now from a lawsuit because I got this plan. But like in Minnesota, where they weren't following the plan, and they were saying, you know, it's unreasonable. We only have to make reasonable modifications. We don't have to make fundamental alterations. The court said, no, you can't use the excuse of insufficient funding to avoid following through on the commitments. In this case, you know, how many years had gone by between 99 and so 16 years had gone by since the Olmsted decision at that point. So I think that's, you know, something that wasn't in your state, but it's something that you can say when you're talking, that courts have found that insufficient funding is not an excuse. And then in Pennsylvania, they said a state must prioritize its allocation of funding to meet and achieve Olmsted goals. So you know, again, who can help the state prioritize its funding? But self-advocates. You know, if people are saying that the biggest the reason that people can't move out is because of housing, then self-advocates can get out there and say, we need scattered site, independent housing, and we don't want you to just build these 9-bed group homes. You know, that's, to us, that's not community living. We want you to spend your money on individualized housing that's accessible and affordable. And or if it's providers that are holding you out, we want, you know, we get out there with provider groups and say, we're going to support you for more funding under Medicaid, or we're going to support you to get be certified and have the increased, you know, training that you need. So, and again, these are rulings in Pennsylvania and in Minnesota, but they talk about how you can't hide behind your plan if you're not really funding it and working with people to prioritize different parts of your plan. So the next slide is what I was thinking about when you talked about, Sherry, the future of Olmstead. So I put down my hope, and maybe in the chat box, people can share their hope, you know, to the extent we have more time. You know, you can just put down what you want to see. But what I want to see is money continuing to shift from institutions to the community. I don't know if you guys ever see this thing that comes out every year. It's called the State of the State on Developmental Disabilities. It's done by the Coleman Institute. But anyway, what it talks about is it every year it looks at each state and how much money they're spending on institutions versus the community. And I don't know that Georgia's spectacular state in closing down all their institutions. I was pretty shocked when Julie said there were 33 sheltered workshops. You know what? I think that you try, if anyone can take the time to write that down, the state of the state and developmental disabilities, and just see how your state compares to other states. If you're in the bottom there, you have, again, even more right to demand shift those funds, because Olmstead is not about a choice to remain in an institution or remain in a sheltered workshop. Again, Olmstead is about the ADA saying you have a right to be free from segregation. And how are you going to be free from segregation and institutionalization if the state doesn't take its pie of money and put more in the community than in institutions? Again, I want new money for community supports. The reason that's different from shifting money is new money would be like, okay, so we've always put this much money into the community. We've never really had a chance to fund, we've never really had a chance to fund this type of community service, but or something that we feel is needed in the community, but we're going to demand new funding. It's very tricky. You can't necessarily do that under the Olmstead ruling, but you don't have to know that. Just demand more. And then that all stakeholders are involved in Olmstead plans. So if Georgia says, okay, we're going to open up our plan again, or we're working on our plan, it's a defense, don't sue us, then remember to say, oh, well, I'm a stakeholder. How many people with disabilities, how many family members, how many stakeholders are on this group since you're got this plan that you're hiding behind, and make sure that there are enough stakeholders. Again, you asked me to say what a plan should have. The most important thing a plan should have is budget. So very often when you read a plan, it will say subject to legislative funding, which means if the legislator doesn't fund the plan, they don't have to do the plan. So you say, no, if you're going to do this plan, we want to see the legislator, you know, usually the plans are done through a court order, And we want to see the legislator actually put together a budget that would fund this plan, especially if it's under a court order. We want to see the legislature fund that. So that's why it's important to know when your legislative session is, and to get out there and say, so they're not going to be able to fund the whole plan at once. I would say, look at your plan, figure out the thing that's most important, whether it's ending the waiting list, adding housing, increases in direct care provider wages. Pick one, go out there to your General Assembly with that sign and say, whatever it is you want to advocate for. So plans must have budgets. They must have timelines. A lot of the plans, you didn't see a single timeline, but a good plan will say, within 5 years, we shall increase the waiting list by X number of slots. Or within 5 years, we will train peer supports to be available to work with folks in state hospitals. Within 3 years, we will have moved X number of people from institutions. So we're talking about specifics like that. And they don't let them laugh at you, because there are plenty of plans out there that do have those specifics. And measurable outcomes. Measurable outcomes would be like, okay, by 2024, we want we want 3 sheltered workshops to have closed down and the money to have shifted to the waiver waiting list. And so when 2024 comes, if that hasn't happened, you can have your people first rally and say, this is what we wanted. This is what our plan said. Where is it? And again, if states don't follow through on plans, they can be sued, and they can't use a plan as a defense to a lawsuit. But right now, you have a Department of Justice that has taken very, 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 very few new Olmstead cases. So it's really fallen on groups like the Protection and Advocacy Agencies, of which Georgia Advocacy Center is one. They did their big Olmstead suit in school settings for kids that were in these segregated, completely underfunded schools, and they were calling them equal, for example. But Department of Justice, they'll often intervene when a PNA takes a case, or they'll write an amicus to support them. But for the past 4 years, we haven't had a lot of movement on that, compared to, for example, the Obama administration, where they made Olmstead a priority. And I don't know, they must have taken at least 20, maybe more Olmstead cases. So I put that in there because, that's something to think about when you're voting. Will the politicians support a strong Department of Justice? Because the Department of Justice has a lot more money than protection and advocacy agencies and legal aid programs. And I don't mean to say PNAs are the only ones suing. There are a lot of great legal aid programs, like National Health Law Program and Center for Public Representation are 2 fantastic ones. And People First has often been plaintiffs in these suits, and that's been so important. So that's it. I'd love to hear what your hope is for the future of Olmstead.
Well, I'm in total agreement with your whole list. I absolutely love it. But I think it's really important to point out to self-advocates that has always been an important key to making these changes happen. It's about doing what Renita's done. Get out, go to the Capitol, talk to legislators, tell them, hey, we need to fund these programs. I can live in the community cheaper than I can in a nursing facility or institution. And, money follows the person has been going on for quite a few years now, all across the country. And you can look at the statistics and see a real cost savings to the state's Medicaid program. And that can help with driving that push for real change, for real services in the community. So, we're down to about 10 minutes to 5. I want to open it up. Juliana, is there any questions in the chat box that you've received yet?
Let me look real quick. I know we had a couple of them earlier.
Great. Let's address those, and then if we could maybe open it up where people can talk, or if you or at least post in the chat box again. But I'm hoping we can open it up where we can actually hear and see people.
Right. So if you have a question, if you can raise your hand, and then I can look and call on you.
Did you say there were some questions earlier?
Yes, I'm trying to pull them up. All right, here we go.
Okay, great.
I had one question. How can I find a list of employers in my state who have a Section 14C certificate?
Just Google it. If you put in 14C holders in your state, you should bring you up a list. But if you can't find it, you can contact your protection and advocacy agency in your state, the P&A in your state, and they should be able to help you find that. I think that would be a great self-advocacy project, say for a People First chapter or another self-advocacy group to do, is to find out who that is, and then contact your state representatives and say, you know, we don't need to be funding this. It's already been proved that it's better for people to be employed in the community. It's cheaper to the system, you know, and you can work with your P&A around maybe coming up with a handout that you can give to the legislators that show those things. I know that NDRN has a really great paper on this. Elizabeth, can you talk about that for a second?
Yes, we have a section on our website, and so does the Center for Public Representation, and it talks about sheltered workshops and why those are in many cases would violate the Americans with Disabilities Act. It also has stories from states who, and several have. I know Washington State is one, who have closed down all of their sheltered workshops, and you know, you'll hear stories from people who had said, oh, you know, I can't change my structure, and then they change the structure and they say, this is great to have everyone working in the community. So, and I know there's one thing that's cool. There's even a movie that I have seen. It's about an hour, and it's called, I can't remember, Bottom Dollars, and it talks about 14C, and several P&As have shown it in their states, like at actual movie theaters. But definitely, you know, it's something where if you do one of these initiatives, road home initiatives, you can try to get bottom dollars. That would be a great suggestion. I think
you can find Bottom Dollars on Amazon. You can actually buy the video and download it, and show it. I know that we've done that here in Georgia, and it is a great movie, and it'll really help you to understand 14C better and see the possibilities of how people with disabilities, even people with significant disabilities, are able to work in regular jobs just like everyone else. It actually features a couple of people and tells their story and show them working in a regular job, just like everybody else, making the same amount of money as all their coworkers. It's a fabulous movie. It really is. It's a great movie. So any other questions, Juliana?
Yeah. So again, it's ndrn.org. National Disability Rights Network.org. Then when you go there, you'll see something at the top that says like resources or issue areas, and you go to employment, and closing down sheltered workshops is the subject of a lot of the stuff on that page.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Mhm.
Any more questions, Juliana?
I'm looking, I don't see any more questions.
So if you have a question, you can do one of two things. You can type it into the chat box, or you can click to raise your hand, and we will unmute you and let you ask the question. So while people are typing or raising their hand, I just want to thank all of our panelists today. Elizabeth, you were fabulous. Thank you so much. Learned so much myself. And Renita, you know, I am always in awe of you. You always inspire me. And, you know, and you're one of my best friends. So what can I say? You know, we are partners in crime.
32
and I love it.
Wow, that's with anyone, it's pretty amazing too.
Yeah, I agree, Elizabeth. So, do we have any questions, Juliana?
I don't have any questions.
All right, well, it's 4 minutes to 5, so I think we can call it a day. And thank you, all the people who registered and showed up for the webinar. We thank you for showing up. We had a total, I think, of 69 people that actually showed up for the webinar. We actually had 101 that registered. So I think that's pretty great. Thank you so much. I hope you got something out of it, and I hope that you'll consider doing a Long Road Home event next year. I am totally available. I am happy to donate an hour if you need, or two, to talk to you about doing your own event. Juliana, if we could go all the way to the last slide. Very last one. So there's my contact information, my email and my phone number. Again, I'm Sheree Mitchell. I'm the national chair for Long Road Home. And I hope that next year you'll consider joining us in trying to change the world and make it a better place and have real Olmstead compliance. So I'm going to say to you, happy Olmstead Day!
Yay!
Yay!
Thank you so much for inviting me to this. It's been an honor.
Well, thank you. We were honored that you joined us. So everybody have a great day. Juliana, you can turn off the recording and